Well, look, thanks very much for coming to join us today.
Sure.
I feel really honoured because I mean, you've got an incredible sort of, you've played all over the world and everything, and you've shared a bill with some fantastic artists.
Thank you. Yes, it's been blessed.
I mean, I did say to one of my friends just before the interview, I said, look, I'm interviewing yourself today. And I sent over a video of you playing guitar, and I said, well, actually, I should probably use the time more wisely. Instead of like interviewing you, I should probably spend the time actually getting you to show me how to play the guitar.
Oh, it's funny. I have a guitar set up, but someone's in a Zoom meeting, like in the other room. So I was like, and the only thing I have up here is like a really loud Marshall. So I was like, oh, maybe I won't do too much playing today, but I'd be up for it, but I just think it's not conducive to the household at the moment, with all things considered, with all us being kind of, staying at home and people working from home. So, I mean, I get it pretty easy because doing music and stuff, but, some people have like serious meetings and stuff to do. And I was like, oh, okay. Yeah. Ooh, it's too heavy for me, But.
So, I mean, your musical journey, where did it start? Because you're actually a multi-instrumentalist, aren't you? It's not just guitar that you actually play. And did you start with French horn and trumpet at first?
Well, yeah, I started playing trumpet in middle school. It's funny because, first day of band class, they let you pick, your top 3 instruments. And like all the other girls, I wanted like flute or clarinet or something small. And by the time they got to me, like all the flute and clarinets had been taken up. So I don't know why, but I had trumpet third on my list because to me it was the next smallest instrument, because like, I don't know why, I don't know what the logic of a, 12-year-old or whatever, 13-year-old is at the time. But I was like, yeah, trumpet. And my teacher's like, yeah, we got trumpets. And I'm like, because all like my girlfriends were playing like, clarinet and flute, and all of them situated in the flute section. And I'm like, what? And I was like, me and like one other girl are in the trumpet section. We're like, oh man, like I didn't really think we would get to my third choice, but actually I ended up really liking it. I really ended up liking the trumpet. And I remember there was a small period of time where like I wanted to be a professional trumpet player. And then in high school, we had so many trumpet players that they moved me to French horn. And I'm like, ooh, this is pretty cool too, so those brass instruments I kind of really dug. And, I still try to keep my chops up, but it's hard. But I did like a film score thing a couple of years ago, and I remember playing trumpet on that track, and man, it was hard. I was like, ooh, my face hurts. And this is different than guitar, you get the finger, but like, man, my face, like it's numb, like, wow,
Well, and so you're still playing the trumpet and French horn? Do you playing regular, or is it?
No, I don't play as regularly as I would like to. And now that you mention, I was like, I should probably play them a little bit more. But I also play a little piano. I think a lot of musicians, doing compositions and being a composer as well, like having another instrument to go to, because I feel like between guitar and piano, they inspire you in different ways. Guitar is very. You can look at a piano is just so linear that you can really look and see what you're doing and get some different voicings. And, it's like 10 fingers opposed to 4. So you can make some really cool chord voicings that then you have to figure out how the hell you're going to play them on guitar, but it's pretty cool. I like it.
And when did you make that transition to sort of like playing guitar? How did you go from sort of playing trumpet and French horn to then? Was it Jimi Hendrix that you heard playing and that was it? That was the turning point, or?
Well, there was always something. Okay, so like back in the day when I became interested in music, like I wanted to play the drums. I loved rhythm because like I grew up in Miami. So it was a lot of, Afro-Cuban rhythms, Latin rhythms. And everybody is so, you just grow up around so many different rhythms and percussion instruments. And I was like, my mom was like, we should, get you into some type of activity, because my god sister, she played, guitar, and she was taking music lessons at the shop. My sister's like, my mom was like, hey, what do you want to learn? I'm like, drums. My mom was like, absolutely not. like next. And I'm like, see, so all through my life, I've never gotten my first choice of instruments here. But it actually worked out for the better. Cause I mean, to me as a kid, all I knew was drums and guitar. Like when you look at rock and roll, that's, cause I didn't know that bass, only had 4 strings. To me, it was like drums, guitar, 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 and somebody who sang, so I was like, I guess guitar. So my mom was like, okay, that's more reasonable. So I had started lessons, I think, when I was really young, like 7 or 8 on guitar. And after a while, like everybody, my fingers hurt, and I complained, and I'm like, Mom, my fingers hurt. And so she's like, fine, like we don't have to do these lessons. So we stopped taking lessons. But a few months later, I kind of missed it. And I started asking her again, like, hey, when can I go back to guitar class? And she's like, you quit. There's no going back. You quit. I was, taking you there, and you didn't want to go anymore. So, tough. And I had to beg her for, it was about a year before she would take me back to guitar lessons. But I never was serious about it, I think, until I became about, 14 or 15. I don't know what I decided. Like I was playing guitar, I was playing trumpet in like concert band, but I was playing like guitar and jazz band. And there was something, I liked classical music and the trumpet and French horn, but there was something about, more modern music and jazz that just resonated with me more. And I was like, I never really thought of it as like a career choice, but then like my music teacher was like, yeah, you could do this for a living. I'm sure like most parents would be like, oh, don't tell her that. Don't tell them that. I'm like, what? I can play guitar and like for, as a job, like what, so then I was like, okay, I'm going to try to do this. So yeah, I was perpetually grounded as a teenager. My parents were, I was kind of one of those kind of wild kids. And so I spent a lot of time at home, and all I could do is I couldn't watch TV or talk on the phone. So I just practice guitar. In retrospect, it was a really good use of my time, rather than, riding around town with my friends or talking on the phone or watching TV. All I did was practice. So it was kind of a blessing in disguise. It was horrible at the time because all my friends were going out and doing fun stuff. And I'm just like, I can't go. I got to stay home. I'm grounded. So, and then I started to get into different musicians. I heard, I was always in like my first favorite bands were like Metallica, Guns N' Roses, and, a lot of stuff they played on the radio. And, and then, when you hear Jimi Hendrix and everything, it was like game over, like, and then I had a jazz phase. Like I went through like a period in high school where, I'm like wearing a beanie, trying to be all like, like a beatnik kind of thing. And I got into jazz a lot, and that was just mind blowing. Like, cause there's no words, you're just listening to the melodies. And I was like, this is incredible. You get into Miles Davis and John Coltrane and some of the classics. And I'm like, that's, I think, really what sold me on the whole thing. Cause I wanted to be a jazzer, so.
I'm going through a phase at the minute. I'm listening to a lot of Jimmy, and he's phenomenal, wasn't he? How his approach to the guitar and everything. It was, I heard the story where, Eric Clapton was sort of the big thing at the time. And then he went and saw Jimi Hendrix because everybody was hailing Clapton is God. They were scrawling across walls and everything else. And I read in his book, and he said somebody invited him along to go and see this guy called Jimi Hendrix. And Eric said, for a young, talented guy that had been put on a pedestal, to see Jimi Hendrix do that, he was like, I want to do that, and it was a hard thing for him to take. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Phenomenal choice.
I remember the first time I heard, I used to do like these in college. I used to play at like these bookstores and do like a little bookstore gig. And, they didn't have a whole lot of money to pay, but they would give us like a gift card to get anything in the store what we wanted. So I used one of my gig gift cards, and I got Jimi Hendrix live at the Fillmore East. It was like a 2 CD live set. And I was like, yeah, I'm going to check this out. I'm going to use my little thing. And I mean, this back when there was like CD players and like Discman and stuff, and I remember, way, way a long time ago, and back in the late 90s. And I remember it was like a great summer day, and I just kind of put a lawn chair outside. I popped in this disc and the headphones, and I was just like, had swirls in my eyes for like the 2 discs. Like, I was absolutely, because I mean, you have radio stuff, radio songs, and I do like radio stuff, but if you really want to hear somebody's soul, you got to listen to live, live concerts. And I just literally, I was like out there, I don't know, it was like hours, and I just had like just swirls in my eyes, and people were like, "What's wrong with you?" And I'm like, "Oh, Jimi Hendrix live at the Fillmore East 2 CD set." I'm like, changed my life, really changed my life, because I had never heard playing that creative, and it just would go somewhere else, but it was awesome. And you were just on this musical journey. And I mean, man, incredible. So.
Absolutely. And you've got I know some of your other influences here, Pat Metheny,
Mm-hmm.
Aaron Bullock,
Mm-hmm.
McCoy Tyner.
Yep.
So these sort of players. So what is it that you sort of take from from those musicians?
They're very big melodic players. I love having a nice melody. Like, I think, improving and, having good chops and everything is really cool. And it's part of a toolbox that, guitar players and musicians have. But when you have like a memorable melody or something that people can hear, like these, like, I mean, Pat Metheny is so melodic. I mean, Jimi Hendrix is so melodic, Hiram Bullock, all those people have this great sense of melody inside their improvisation that I just really connected with that. And, I was like, I want to be like that, because I want to hear these melodies in my head, be able to put them out on the guitar, like in real time. And that's just such a struggle. Some days I'm like, oh, that went well. And other days it's like, not so great. But that's what I really liked about them, and just them as composers as well are very melodic, and have these, great melodies that just resonated with me.
And you went to Berkley College of Music, is that right? Is that where you
I
studied with Jennifer Batten?
No, like, I went to Berkeley, but I'm recently studying with Jennifer Batten. Like, we study online because, she lives in Oregon. And I mean, I had some great teachers while I was there at Berkeley. And, the campus was amazing because you'd be walking down the hallway and you're like, there's Bella Fleck. Like, okay, that's random. That people would be visiting the campus, and you'd be like, hey, that's John Schofield. Like, it was such a crazy, crazy environment. But I went to Berkeley, and I, was a guitar major, but I studied music business because I figured, like, hey, I want to educate myself in the business end of things, because I feel like that's where a lot of, back in the day, like, the man's gonna, take advantage of the musician. Like, I want to learn about this so I don't get, run around the block a bunch, So I got really into the business of things. And so after I did an internship my senior year, and I worked for Pat Metheny. And then after I graduated, they hired me there to work for his management. And I helped out with like his royalties and publishing, and, got to learn about how that all works. Now it's all so different because of streaming and internet radio. Like, all that I learned and everything is like out the window and outdated. I mean, people had, physical albums back then. It's so, old now, but the music industry has changed a lot since then. But I still think it was great to kind of learn, the ropes of like what to look out for, and educate yourself and those ways, so that people don't, try to take advantage of you.
Sure, yeah. Well, you graduated with a degree in music business,
Mhm.
and then your career started, or is that when your career started out as a professional guitarist?
Well, I mean, the funny thing is, the reason why I majored in music business is because I was already performing around Boston and the New England area. We're playing in New York and all those places. And I was playing more than the performance majors. And I'm like, I don't need a degree to perform per se. But I think a lot of it is that, people wanted to focus on performance, so that with your major, you only took those kind of classes, where I didn't mind performing and then taking accounting and economics and, all these things that people were like, you're doing what? You're taking accounting? Like, this is a music school. I'm like, but still, like, I mean, it was one of the harder majors because people thought it was, the subjects were too heavy,
Yeah.
So I mean, there was a very, not a whole lot of people doing music business, because I mean, most people were just there to be creative and do things. And you have your people who did, like, recording engineers and stuff like that. But music business people are like, why are you doing that? Like, you're taking, copyright law, like, and, all these, heavy classes, and they're like, oh, that just sounds too much. But I worked in the business for a while, for a few years after graduating, and I was still performing on the side. But then I decided, you know what? I really like to be a performer instead of, working. I worked for, a management company, and I decided, you know what? I want to be the artist. I don't want to, help manage the artist. So I ended up moving from Boston to here, Atlanta, where I still am. And I was in this all girl band, and we had gotten on the Vans Warped Tour back then. They were called Girl Parts. And so we were on the Vans Warped Tour, and we did, a bunch of dates on that. And I just happened to come through Atlanta. And I feel like Boston was so oversaturated with so many musicians, and New England was, because you had all your music schools in New York, you had multiple music schools and colleges in Boston, and everybody's kind of gunning for the same gigs.
Yeah.
And I think because of that, like, pay was low, because if you're not going to do a gig, for $100, somebody else is going to do it for 80 or 75 or 50. So I was like, well, it really seems kind of hard. For me, I thought, to be in such a saturated market. And people do, the people, of course, can be successful. But I was like, there's probably less competition down in Atlanta. And the singer of the band, she moved down here. And I was like, the cost of living is just so much cheaper in Atlanta than like up in New England area. I was like, you can get a whole house for rent for the same price of this tiny ass apartment. I'm like, oh my God, like, I'm going to move to Atlanta. So that's kind of where I moved. But it's been really interesting because, growing up in Miami, I had like the whole, I mean, I'm Hispanic. So I had like the Hispanic culture growing up, and then moving to New England and dealing with like the New England culture, and then moving to Atlanta, now dealing with like the Southern culture. It's been really trippy, because there's all these different cultures, and, the South is really kind of R&B driven and blues. And it's been really, really cool. Like at first, and there's a lot of hip hop and rap, which is awesome. So it's been like every place that I've lived is just these different musical things going on. And I'm, Atlanta's super close to Nashville. So I drive up there. It's like 3.5 hour drive. So you got all the country now, like so much rock is happening in Nashville now. So I feel like Atlanta's like a really good area to kind of get around, this part of the country. There's a lot going on. So.
Well, I think in the States, where there's so much land between different cities and everything else, you're going to get that diversity. But you get it in the UK. I mean, even from certain parts of the Midlands, there's different diverse accents and things like that. You can go to Liverpool or you can go to Manchester. The music's very different. Then you hop them down to London, the music changes again and the culture changes. So I bet in America it's vastly different.
Then you go on the West Coast and you got your surf rock, and you go out in the, the desert area and you got your desert rock. I'm like, it's really cool. There's a lot of, really cool musical things happening. And I'm like open to it all, because I think it's all cool. Like I listen from everything from, bluegrass to like, techno club music. And I mean, I have a lot of like secret likes of music, like some, Britney Spears, or like really modern. I love like Billie Eilish. Like I'm just all over the place. So, I mean, I think everything, I really appreciate people being creative, and it takes a lot of courage to create any kind of music. And I really respect, anybody that has the courage to go out there and record their own stuff, because it's not easy.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And you've done a fair bit of traveling. I mean, you've been to places like France, Germany, Egypt, Italy. You've been all over, really.
Yeah, and that's why I'm home now, and I'm like, when am I going to get out again? I mean, because like actually we were supposed to do a tour all through the UK, and I had this one place I haven't been, and so we were going to play like in Leeds, Manchester, Nottingham, Brighton, and it got postponed. So technically, I should be out that way next year, hopefully the summer of 2021. That all goes well, but I'm hoping. I mean, I just think the UK just sounds so cool, and I'm just excited to just check out the culture. That's what I really like, checking out the culture of places. And like when we would travel to Egypt, I went with this rock band, and we like to go and just talk to a lot of the locals, and they were just the nicest people. And they gave us cassettes of like Egyptian music. They're like, oh, you got to check out this Egyptian artist, and oh, you'd really like this person. And so it's really nice, just, drink and make us tea and playing us all these Egyptian artists. Like, wow. I think it's so cool. Like I just love to absorb culture of where I'm at, you know.
Well, when you're playing in the UK, drop us a line and we'll come and see you.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Going over and we'll come and see you play. So
Awesome.
Is that with which band is that with?
It'll be with Klymaxx. Now we were supposed to do a tour. So I've been playing guitar for Klymaxx for a while, and I was also going to play guitar for on that same tour was going to be En Vogue, because En Vogue had kind of like the 4 members, each of them kind of 2 and 2 started their own projects. It's funny, band split, it's like, you know, nucleus splitting, and so they're each kind of doing their own thing. So I was going to play with Don and Maxine of En Vogue and do guitar duty for them as well on this tour. We're going to be on tour with Belinda Carlisle and Human League. That was the tour we were supposed to do all through the UK. And so like the fact that it didn't happen, I was like, oh, this was going to be so fun. But you know, Joyce, who's our band leader in Klymaxx, and she's like, Vanessa, don't worry, like it's gonna happen. It just got postponed. Because I'm just like, like it was gonna be so much fun. I was so looking forward, and I still am. I mean, it's just hard, you know. You got to try to keep your spirits up as a musician, because when everything gets canceled, it's very easy, you know, for your brain to go to dark places. Like this is never gonna happen. Yeah. We're never gonna get out again, you know. So I'm like, okay, snap out of it, like. You know, but now with the holidays coming up, and not that I'm traveling or doing, but just the idea of being, you know, festive and having, you know, this time of year. And the next thing you know, it'll be January, and hopefully, you know, something will come up, you know, at the beginning of the new year and have some changes that are for the better.
Yeah, I'm sure of it. And you mentioned some of the artists that you've been on the bill with, and I've just made a note of you here. So you've also been on the bill with people like Skid Row.
Yep. KISS.
Joan Jett and the Blackhearts.
That was fun. Yeah. We opened up for her, I think it was last summer. And, you know, as a person, as a female growing up, you know, watching her on MTV, I was like, oh my God. And so like when she was coming to town, it was like so surreal, because their promoter of this venue had called me and was like, hey, this is so-and-so. Do you guys want to open for Joan? I'm like, who's pranking me now? Like, who is this? This is not really happening. And he's like, no, like, I'm serious. And I was like, oh my God. So like, I remember hanging up the phone and being just like, you know, like a 10-year-old girl, be like, ah, and then like trying to hold it together and call, you know, straight faced calling the rest of the band, be like, hey, are you guys available on this day? And they're like, oh yeah, for what? I'm like, well, we'll be open up for Joan Jett. And they're like, shut up. And I'm like, oh my God, you know, it was just so fun. So I got to meet her, you know, briefly, and you know, you're just like, oh no, don't say something stupid, like don't, you know. And I'm just like, oh, you know, I'm calling her like Miss Jett, you know, like, and it's just, she's such a tiny, petite, you know, beautiful woman. And I was just like, oh, you know, and she, you know, we got off stage and she's like, oh yeah, you did a great job, you know. And I'm just like, oh my God, like, but I'm like trying to hold it together. I'm like, well, thank you, you know, trying to be like, you know, but yeah, it was really great. And we got to do the KISS cruise with another band that I was in. And so we got to meet KISS and, you know, Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley. They were just such nice, down to earth people. And that's what I find, you know, mostly. And other bands we've opened up, like for Darius Rucker, and, you know, so we've kind of done some and different things. And with, you know, with En Vogue, we one of the most interesting shows we opened up for what's his name? Oh my gosh. Oh, I can't think of it now, but I'll think of it in a minute. But we've just had so many like interesting artists that we've opened up for that are just legendary, you know, in like the R&B world. Because I've really gotten into R&B. It's really fun because you're playing like pocket playing and it's funky, and I really like, you know, like funk and stuff too. So, you know, it's funny, I went from like this rock guitarist and now doing like more we opened for George Clinton and Parliament Funkadelic, and that was nuts because his band is just off the wall, man. I mean, it was like a guy in like sheepskin legs with like hoof shoes doing handstands. I mean, it was just like the craziest thing I'd ever seen, but I was like, that is just too cool. Like I said, I love just seeing people being artistic and being them, you know.
You mentioned notable like female performers like Joan Jett, and I remember going to see Simple Minds a few years ago, and Pretenders were supporting them.
Yeah.
Chrissy Hind, she looked fabulous, and the voice just still there, unbelievable.
Yeah.
And oh, it's giving me goosebumps now just thinking about it, you know. And so, and I just, she hasn't lost any of her vocals. And I took a few photos, and just her playing this pink, I think it was a pink Paisley Telecaster. And I thought, it just doesn't get more rock and roll than that. You
Yeah,
know.
she's incredible. Yeah. I mean, I read her book a couple years ago, and just like, you know, the history of how, you know, it's so, to me, I read a lot of like biographies and autobiographies because I'm just curious as how, you know, people's life. And I just read the one from Steve Lukather, his biography, or autobiography, and it was just great. Like, to me, I in my head, I read it like they're talking, and it was really funny, and just to hear like people's rock and roll stories, because there's never a boring rock and roll story, you know what I mean? Like, they're always like really crazy and just really, really good. So I enjoy, I mean, I've read like, you know, the Miles Davis, you know, biography, and, you know, Coltrane, still crazy, still crazy.
Yeah.
Anything I think in the music industry is just nuts, but I love it.
And going back to the female performers and stuff. I mean, are you vice president for Guitar Girl magazine? Is that?
Yep, I'm the vice president of editorial content. So the funny story is, I had a rehearsal with my band BAST, and the bass player and I, you know, we kind of started BAST together. We had played in bands together for many, many years, and you know, we decided to do like an original band. So that's how kind of BAST was born, and that's the band that opened up for Joan Jett and the Blackhearts. We were just a power trio, just me playing guitar and singing, a bass player and a drummer. And we had gone out to grab something to eat and a beer after rehearsal, and we were talking shop and talking music, and this lady comes up to me and she goes, "Excuse me, are you a guitar player?" She's like, "I didn't mean to eavesdrop." And I was like, "Oh yeah, yeah." And she ended up being the editor for Guitar Girl magazine. That's how I met her. It was just out at a restaurant. And so initially I had done an interview for them, but her and I kept talking, and I'm very passionate about, you know, gear and writing and putting stuff out there. I mean, Guitar Girl magazine is, of course, for everyone, because every female player has male influences. Like, I mean, you know, it's just everything. But, you know, that's the kind of magazine she got, you know, pinpointing, or just really kind of focusing on women of all different genres. I mean, there'll be Americana, country, rock, jazz. And I mean, there's tons of guitar magazines out there: Guitar World, Guitar One, Guitar Player. And I mean, they do have women in there, but you know, you'd see women like Joan Jett, or women like, you know, very famous, but you know, this kind of really got into the underworld of, you know, up and coming and other kind of female artists that may not be on the cover of Guitar, you know, Player, Guitar Magazine, stuff like that. So it was really cool. So when she's asked, like, "Do you mind, you know, doing some, you know, product reviews?" And I love gear, so I'm like, "Oh, this is so fun," you know. And we try out pedals, or, you know, picks or things like that. And I love that kind of stuff because I'm just a gear junkie. Like, I just can't. I mean, nowadays gear is just crazy, like compared to what it was 10 years ago. Like, gear is just nuts now. And so from that, I kept doing that. And then I just got more and more involved with the magazine. And like I said, I'm very, very passionate about, you know, doing things like, you know, it just kind of, you bring people to the know of like, hey, you got to check out this person and check out this gear and check out this stuff. So, but that's kind of how it all started. But yeah, so now I've kind of became